What does it look like to bring your full self? Because when you're bringing your full self, that's possible that you can be causing harm to the people around you if your full self is holding on to wounds and holding on to unhealed trauma and holding on to things that now disconnects people from care, respect, and reciprocity. So the
Hmm.
first part of this work is the self-care piece. I need to do the work to heal my trauma because my trauma, my unhealed wounds will now impact the people I want to be in community with. I also have to be willing to listen to their needs and make sure when I'm in this space and when I'm cultivating these relationships, I'm honoring their humanity the way I would want people to honor mine.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the Terry Cole Show. This episode of the Terry Cole Show, I really, really loved interviewing today's guest. Her name is Minaa B, and that's Minaa B. She's a licensed psychotherapist, a writer, a speaker, and she's an author. She has a book that's coming out in August called Owning Our Struggles, A Path to Healing and Finding Community in a Broken World. Our conversation today was riveting. I was so into what she was talking about, really about healing ourselves and healing as a community. And she gives us some ideas and things that we can actually do to make it better. We talked a little bit, you don't want to be too depressing about the world being a broken place, but come on, it kind of is. And I love that Minaa is doing this work in the world and sort of guiding us in how we can be a part of the solution instead of being a part of the problem. I actually found Minaa, I was thinking about it at the top of my interview with her, on Instagram. And she is such an original thinker and she's so precise with her words. And I really love the content that she puts out there. So I hope that you like this interview with Minaa B as much as I really loved having her on the show. I am so excited to welcome Minaa B to the Terry Cole Show. Hi, Minaa.
Hi, Terry. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm so glad that you are here. So first, I was trying to remember, like, how did we get connected? Was it just through social media?
It definitely was through social media. Yes.
All right, I highlighted. You guys, if you're not following Minaa on Insta, you need to be. So what is your handle, Minaa?
It's Minaa_B, and that's Minaa with two A's,
Right.
Minaa_B.
Okay, so that's really how it was. And then I found out you were like friends with 1,000 people of my friends. Like, you know, a lot of the same people. We were at the same book launch in the city, although I didn't see you, but because there were so many people there. That's exactly right. We did a Monday spotlight on one of your things, and I've actually shared many of your things at this point, but that was probably a year and a half ago, maybe. And I was like, wow, this woman has a brain. I really like original thoughts. Thank you.
Mhm.
Woohoo. All right, so let's move on into the first thing I want to talk about is how you ended up. Like, I just feel like all of us who become therapists, there's always some damn good reason why we did it. So for you, what is your origin story? Like, what brought you to becoming a psychotherapist?
So my origin story dates back to childhood. Like I think that's the cliche for every therapist, right? Just reflecting on our childhood trauma. But really, it was my childhood experiences that brought me to therapy. It wasn't until I became an adult that I understood that as a kid, I struggled with anxiety as well as depression. But of course, when you're a child, you don't understand what the constant gut imbalances or stomach aches mean. You don't understand why you're always crying, and your parents might label it as you being very sensitive, very emotional, and you can't really pinpoint or understand why are these things happening to me? Why am I having this particular type of emotional reaction to this person in my family or the things that are happening to me in school? And so for me, I think when I became older and older an adult and I was pursuing college, I actually originally went to business school for undergrad. And the reason why is because I wasn't 100% sure if I was ready to jump into the mental health field. I wanted to explore a lot of different things, but I actually had a sociologist professor who was a social worker. And just being in her class, I still remember to this day how amazing her work was, and her
Mm.
teachings just really inspired me. The stories she would share about her clients, and really centering both micro and macro level work, because my work doesn't just focus only on the individual. I also pay attention to social inequities and things that are happening in the world that impact us as people. And that is when I decided I wanted to pursue my master's in social work. So I think all of it just kind of came together, and I made that decision to commit to this field.
Right, right. So, had you had your own therapeutic experience, though, that helped you with understanding your anxiety and all that stuff?
Yes. So I was fortunate that when I started grad school, literally that same month is when I started therapy.
Mm.
So I had the benefit of being in therapy while simultaneously learning about clinical therapy, learning about human experience, human behavior, childhood trauma, racial trauma, social inequities, how that impacts the individual, risk factors, all of those things. So
Yeah.
I do feel like I was able to have a very unique path, since I was able to explore myself while in the therapy session, but then also I got to be in class and learn about different topics that I realized, oh shoot, this also applies to me and my own experience. And let me take this to therapy tomorrow. And I think
Exactly.
that was a beautiful experience that I was able to have.
Yeah, it's so amazing. That's such a great that you had this parallel process going on simultaneously and how beneficial it is, because I do think it's so important for us to understand our own stuff, right? Our own, why are we this way? I think it resonates. Your work certainly resonates. You can see with what's happening on Instagram and how people respond to your work, that so many different walks of life, people resonate with what you share. You have this ability to sort of find the intersection of like humanness, you
Thank you.
know? I do believe it's true. And how many people just respond to it like, oh my God, yes, that's me, or yes, that, it's rare for me, sort of not rare, but there's only X number of people online where I go, wow, like, or I never thought of it that way. Because obviously I've been doing this 25 years. I've thought of lots of things, lots of ways, you know? So I appreciate that ability to sort of cut through the theoretical and really speak directly to the emotional experience, because that's what clients and people on Instagram and people, we can identify like, oh yeah, that feeling that she's describing, that experience, that is kind of hitting me. So I wanted to talk about what prompted you. You have a book coming out in August. It's on August 22nd, but pre-orders are open right now, folks.
Yeah.
It's called Owning Our Struggles, A Path to Healing and Finding Community in a Broken World.
Mm.
So you guys can Amazon it up. You can get it. You probably get it on your website as well, I imagine, or yeah. So in the meantime, I just want to know what prompted you to write this particular book, and tell us about the book, please.
Yes, of course. So I actually got the concept for the book in 2020. And I think we all know what kind of year 2020 was on an individual level as well as on a collective level, the things we all experienced. The year of the pandemic, the year of George Floyd's murder, the year of
Mm-hmm.
so many racial and social injustices that were taking place. Again, on top of being in isolation and experiencing what was a form of global trauma, something we never were ready to experience, nor were we equipped to deal with what 2020 brought us.
Mm-mm.
And so I think in the midst of being very disconnected, and I was still seeing clients at that time, I was really fixated on what collective healing looks like, because I felt the world was so disconnected and broken.
Mm.
People were yearning for connections. People were yearning for touch, right? A lot of people struggled with touch deprivation.
Yeah.
I think also 2020 brought to the surface a lot of emotional wounds people didn't realize they were dealing with. Right. So we had to be stuck in our homes, maybe with family members who were dysfunctional, and our
Mm-hmm.
commute to work, being in the office for 8 hours, literally was our safe haven.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing remote work, and the person that's in a room across from me is probably one of the people I have the most dysfunctional and abusive relationships with.
Yep.
We saw a spike in divorce rates, right? Where I also think couples were able to use going to work, socializing, all of these things as band-aids to deal with
Hmm.
their ruptures because they weren't head on, right? They weren't seeing
Yep.
each other every single day,
Yep.
all day long. And I think at that time, what I felt was happening for a lot of people were everyone started to embrace mental health at that point. Everyone started talking about we need therapy. We need to really get to the root of what's happening, right? But I
Yep.
think what was also missing, however, in that conversation was we also need community care because we don't go to therapy to heal and exist in a vacuum. We do
Hmm.
all of this healing work because I believe that self care is the bridge to community care. I
Hmm.
can do all of this healing in private, but do I also know how to be a good friend? Do I know how to be a good partner? Do I even know how to be a good colleague? And I
Hmm.
think sometimes we conflate this work as ego work where some of us walk out feeling a sense of entitlement, right? My boundaries are all about me, but do you know how to respect other people's boundaries?
Yep.
Right. And so I really wrote this book because I wanted to teach people how to practice both healthy selfishness and selflessness at the same time. In
Oh,
a world where we're learning to practice boundaries and we're getting better with setting limits and we're getting better with focusing on our needs, I want to make sure that people are not just focusing on the I, but they're also focusing on the we because we don't exist to be disconnected from people. So
right.
that is what the premise of this book is all about, giving people the tools they need to heal from their trauma through community care.
Wow, that's amazing. There's so many things I want to say. But one of them, you hit on something that I see all the time in my work with boundaries, which is that people get really good, and I applaud them to get really good at their own boundaries and setting limits. And yet the flip side and sort of the shadow side of boundary work that people don't want to deal with is how do you accept or respect the boundaries of others? And especially with the people pleasers in my crew, which is a lot, there are people who have sort of been sucking it up and taking one for the team for a really long time.
Mm.
So if you have the audacity to assert your need as a people pleaser, there is so much judgment. There's like, can't believe how selfish you are. I can't believe what a jerk you are. I can't believe how self-absorbed you are. And what I find really interesting is that as clients evolve in their self-work and their therapy work, I see this shift where people who used to threaten them because they had good boundaries, oh, now they're like, no, actually, I realized I respect her.
Mm.
I was just pissed that I couldn't do what she was doing, or that I felt afraid to be judged if I took that stance. I think one of the most important parts of what you're sharing in your book is the community care element, because the divisiveness, the separation that is, oh, for so many reasons that we're not going to get into, we know why. It was, first of all, always here, but it got super amplified in 2020 and beyond. And the political scene did not help. And there's a million things that created so much of an us and them. So, how do you teach us, people who want to be more community care minded, but are just not sure what that looks like in real life?
Mm. I think the first step is going back to the concept of self care is the bridge to community care.
Mm.
So the first step is self healing work is pivotal to collective healing
Mm.
because I bring my full self to community. We bring our full selves to community. So that means I bring my unhealed trauma, I bring my wounds, I bring my beliefs, I bring possibly my bigotry and anything else that makes me me, my thoughts, my ideologies. I bring that into the room. I bring that everywhere I go. So I always tell people the first part of this work is self reflective work.
Mm.
It means being self aware. It means practicing self attunement to look inward and say, I deeply desire and yearn for community, but what can I possibly be doing that's getting in the way of that?
Yeah.
What are some belief systems that I hold that maybe I need to unlearn? Maybe I have a habit of walking around thinking, well, I was raised this way, right? So therefore, there's no possible way I can think differently. Of course you can. right? And so I always encourage people to be thinking about, what does it look like to bring your full self? Because when you're bringing your full self, that's possible that you can be causing harm to the people around you if your full self is holding on to wounds and holding on to unhealed trauma and holding on to things that now disconnects people from care, respect, and reciprocity. So the
Mm-hmm.
first part of this work is the self-care piece. I need to do the work to heal my trauma, because my trauma, my unhealed wounds will now impact the people I want to be in community with. So I really say that self-reflective piece is so pivotal because it allows us to get deeper and more in tune with who we are, the beliefs we carry, and then we start to figure out the pieces that we need to start unlearning to make room for growth in our lives. The next thing I will say though is now that bridging it to community care, right? And so how am I learning to be a good person to other people? How am I practicing emotional vulnerability? I always say, think about what makes you feel safe and ask yourself, do I provide this level of safety with others? I don't like when people judge me in conversations, but I'm really quick to be snappy with someone else. So that is a part of that self attunement and that self awareness, so that you can realize, when I do now want to enter spaces where I'm developing a community, being connected to other people, I
Mm-hmm.
also have to be willing to listen to their needs and make sure when I'm in this space and when I'm cultivating these relationships, I'm honoring their humanity the way I would want people to honor mine.
It's so good and it's so much. And I think what I see in the online world for sure is that it certainly seems to be like growing and being better now. I don't know if it's better, but I feel like people are more aware, let's say. But in 2020 and even before, if you have well-meaning people who don't see themselves as doing harm, right? As you don't see themselves as racist, don't understand their own internalized bias, don't aren't willing to look. And I remember I took a course in grad school actually to become a therapist, and it was a course on race relations and on race. And it was so painful, right? I couldn't explain it then. And this is still in my early 30s, right? So this isn't like I wasn't like 15, but I couldn't even explain why the truths of other people's experiences, people in more marginalized groups, that I bawled my eyes out every time I left that class. And I was also so internally defensive. Like, I'm not like that. And I had a Black boyfriend. Like, I did all the wrong things that don't, it's all of this trying to convince myself because it was so painful to understand the bias that I did have. And it took years of self-reflecting work and working with others and working with women of color in particular, learning from them, not asking them to do it for me, but paying and learning and being in groups and, bringing myself to things that there was a shift in understanding the difference between how just not being actively racist, quote unquote, is not the same as being anti-racist.
Yeah.
And that took a period of time. And I consider myself someone who was raised not even in an overtly racist situation, but it doesn't matter because that the privilege of being in the majority group, that backpack of privilege that was so painful for me to admit that I always had. Once I started getting real and reflective about that, it made the work, of course, it made my relationship so much deeper. And and I'm still doing that work today. But for you and in the book, first of all, what are your thoughts about all of that I just said?
Well, I think I love everything that you said, because I think this can help so many people. The key thing that you said was that, one, it took years. Anti racism work and practicing anti racism is not something that someone is going to overcome overnight. It is literally a journey, right? I think the second thing that you said that was so important was you started to listen, you started to learn, you started to understand the experiences of other people of color. Sometimes you have to put yourself out there to learn and educate yourself. And I think everything that you said is just so important, because I think sometimes people don't understand that racism itself is a system. right? It's systemic, it's institutional, but it's also on an individual level. And when people hear the word racism or there's conversations around racism, I think often for non BIPOC members of our community, the first thought is, you're calling me a racist. And it's like, no, I'm actually
Mhm.
not calling you a racist, but I need you to understand racism as a system in
Right.
this country that benefits whiteness more than it benefits any other group.
Yep.
We don't have to go back 400 years to see it.
No.
We can still see it present and actively now. And I think what's hard for people is the body is so designed to self protect. And so, because the body is designed to self protect, it's easy to get into a place of defensiveness. It's
Hmm.
easy for the ego to become in a driver's seat and place blame. Because again, I think when people are engaging in these conversations, their guard is immediately up because it's like, how dare you call me such an evil thing? And
Hmm.
what that teaches me is people understand racism is evil.
Yeah.
People understand racism is bad, is which is why the ego gets so inflamed because it's like, how dare you associate me with something that's so terrible and so nasty? But
Yep.
I think that's the first awakening, right? Because when you are able to see racism as an act of evil, racism that benefits one particular group in this country, racism that's still prevalent, that can now help you to recognize, one, in what ways might I be inadvertently contributing to this system? And
Yep.
two, because I'm learning that the system is so evil, so harmful, so dysfunctional, how can I be an active member in my society
Yep.
so that I can now build systemic and institutional change? And
Right.
that change honestly starts in our communities. It
Yep.
starts with, how am I being a better ally? How am I being a better friend? How am
Hmm.
I learning to have these conversations and just sit in the thick of it, even when I feel uncomfortable? How can I, again, silence my ego and say, this is a time where you have to be quiet, right? Because again, when we think of power and privilege, that
Hmm.
creates this ideology that your voice is supposed to be the loudest in the room.
Right.
So, what does it feel like when you're told this is not a conversation that you can be a part of, but you can listen? We
Right.
want you to listen, but this isn't your lived experience. So
Yep.
this is not necessarily something for you to contribute to, but we want you to learn and take away from it. And that
Yes.
can rile some people up if you're so used to being the voice,
Right.
right? And I think racism is so multi-layered because it's a system.
Yep.
It's deeply complex, but I talk about it in my book. I literally state in the introduction, because I have a whole chapter on racism. It's chapter 3, and it's called Cultivating Safe Spaces, right? Living in a world full of racism. And I encourage my readers, my white readers as well, please do not skip over this chapter. And the reason why is because by reading that and learning, you're number one, honoring the work that was written by a Black woman.
Hmm.
And number two, if you want to be in community with people, though you may not be able to say, I relate to you, you can learn to understand. And we have to be willing to go there by reading the things that I wrote in my book so that you can understand what racism is as a system, what it looks like to be a better ally, be a better friend, and support members of the BIPOC community. And also teach yourself things that maybe you didn't learn in school, or clearly your family didn't teach you because it's not a lived experience.
Right.
So I do thank you for everything that you shared. And I think that if we could all get to this place of togetherness, and
Right.
recognize that is the goal. The goal is literally connectedness and togetherness. And racism is just another wound that is at the surface that we need to heal together. I can't heal racism by myself as a Black woman.
Right.
When you educate yourself and you take the time to learn and understand and use discernment so that you can know how to maneuver through the world when you are experiencing or witnessing racism,
Hmm.
then you can be a valuable member to society and be a role in implementing change. And that is what it means to practice anti-racism.
Without a doubt. The one thing that I also think is something that for the perfectionists in the group, for everyone has this fear, or at least my own experience is a fear of doing it wrong, a fear of using the wrong terms, a fear of saying it wrong, a fear of just misstepping, making a mistake. And X number of years ago, I just decided like, it's okay. There just has to be room to do the best that you can. If you make a mistake, own it. Be sorry. Just, you don't have to write a dissertation on it, but just in order to actually be of any kind of service, it can't just be not saying anything out of fear, which I feel like for a long time, and for a lot of people, a lot of white people who have a voice, there is this fear of doing it wrong. And here's the thing, not doing it is the wrong thing. So just do it the best you can. And if you mess up, just say you're sorry. Be sorry, you know?
Mhm. Right. Be willing to learn and use that as a moment where you can take that information in, hold yourself accountable, and figure out how to do better, because this is a work in progress. You're going to be doing this daily.
Yeah.
And I say that in my book all the time, like everything, regardless of what chapter you're in, whether you're dealing with your childhood trauma, talking about dysfunctional parental relationships, or doing that anti-racism work, everything related to healing is a daily practice.
Oh,
So when
no
you
doubt.
mess up, be willing to unlearn, be willing to say, oh my God, someone called me in. Someone helped me to recognize that that wasn't okay. And now I have an opportunity to do better. I always tell people accountability is a form of grace. When I
Mhm.
hold you accountable and I call you in and I say, hey, Terri, or hey, this person, I want to let you know that what you said was inappropriate. That's an invitation. And that's allowing you to see, I want you in this community with me. So
Right.
therefore, I'm going to guide you and inform you because I want you here. It's not that I'm trying to push you out by educating you. I'm actually trying to bring you in. And that's an act of generosity.
Yes, it's so interesting. I mean, this is very very similar to with boundaries. Like when people don't want to have the hard conversation, and I always say, listen, your deepest intimacy is built on loving someone enough, caring enough to have the hard conversation. And when people see it, sort of, there's a connection between the courage it takes to call someone in or out, right? Depending on what we're talking about. That takes courage, but it also takes care. And so I agree with you, like reframing it as an invitation to listen, to just do something different, to consider someone else's point of view. So for you, you talk in the book also quite a bit about boundaries. So let's talk a little about the importance of boundaries for building community and overall having healthy relationships.
Well, I think it's important for people to be honest with themselves and own that we all have limits. It is impossible to be everything to everyone. It is impossible to take on every task, every responsibility. We literally are not equipped to do everything at once. And so I always tell people to reframe how they see boundaries. Boundaries is an act of generosity. By me being vocal and letting you know and informing you that this is a task I can't take on. I'm sorry, but the answer is no. I can't engage in this conversation, so I'm just going to put my phone on do not disturb, or I'm just not going to answer that call, right? That is allowing people to understand that I want that intimacy with you, but I want you to understand that there's a cap on what I can do,
Yep.
right? I cannot be everything to everyone in every moment. And so by me expressing my boundary to someone, I'm inviting them into my community because I'm letting them know that you're important to me enough for me to inform you that this boundary exists so that you know how to be in a relationship with me.
Yeah.
And I think that when we can reframe boundaries from boundaries are mean and boundaries are selfish and boundaries start to evoke this feeling of guilt, and guilt means I did something bad, we have to start asking ourselves, why do I think I don't deserve healthy relationships?
Yeah.
Because by thinking your boundaries are bad and thinking you're a bad person for having a boundary, what you're simultaneously saying is, I don't deserve protection. I don't deserve safety. I don't deserve to be heard in these relationships that I'm in. And that's why
Mhm.
your boundaries exist, because you do deserve safety, protection, and emotional care, which is why we express our limits to other people. So again, they know how to be in relationship with us. And if they care enough to be in relationship with us, they will respond to our boundaries in a healthy way. Yeah.
Yes. I love that so much because it's so true. It's like if they care enough really to be in relationship, I always say when we're talking about boundaries in relationships and even feelings, that I don't expect my husband to always like fully get why I feel the way I do about something, but he must care
Mhm.
that I feel that way if something is distressing to me. Like he doesn't have to understand it. And of course, he's been trained well enough and has had all his own therapy, so he knows to just allow. If I'm saying I'm upset about this, he would never be like, "You have no reason to be upset," and he would also never say, "I don't understand." He would invite, "Tell me more. How can I best support you right now?" or whatever. I mean, of course, we've been together 25 years, so our communication is good. We've had a lot of therapy together and separately. But I think that what you're saying about the way people respond to our boundaries, it tells us so much about where they are.
Mhm.
And a lot of times people will look at it like if someone responds to your boundary like negatively, or they can't deal, or they withdraw in anger, or whatever it is they do, like that they're a terrible person, right? I don't necessarily think that that's true, right? I think that some people can't handle it. You change in especially a well-established relationship, they feel threatened. They're trying to make you, as Dr. Harriet Lerner would say, she talks about a change back move. They're
Mhm.
trying to get you to go back to the old dance. And yet, I always say to my clients when I'm teaching them about boundaries, like, it's going to take a minute because you've been doing this boundary dance with this person for like 2.5 decades.
Mhm.
So if you start changing the dance steps, A, they're going to notice, but B, it's going to take a minute. That doesn't mean abort the mission of sharing your boundaries. It means we can't be so sensitive that the second someone pushes back on a boundary that we're like, oh my God, I'm never telling them the truth again, because then you end up not being known, right? I mean, is that your experience?
Yes, absolutely. I definitely agree with you. I've been in experiences where I'll give a funny example where, I started putting my phone on do not disturb more often than I normally do. And I've had people who will complain about it, where they'll say, like, I can't believe you have me on do not disturb. And I tried to call you and the phone went straight to voicemail. And when I text you, all it says is do not disturb. I can't believe it. And, I'll just, it's like accessibility, right? People want access to you at all times. And I'll say to them, like, my phone being on do not disturb is actually a courtesy to you. Because
Yeah.
the moment you see that notification, it's informing you that I'm not available right now.
Yes.
Versus if I didn't have do not disturb on, you probably would think I'm ignoring you intentionally.
Right.
And so that actually is a courtesy so that when people see it, it's explicitly letting you know I am not available to talk right now. And
Right.
guess what? I'm not taking my phone off do not disturb. Right? So I've had this conversation numerous times, even with the same people. And you know what I say? I'm still not taking my phone off do not disturb. And I trust that whatever emotion that you have as a result of my phone being on do not disturb, I trust you can overcome that feeling. I have confidence that you can sit with your dysregulation.
Yeah.
And I had to reframe my thinking around my boundaries like that too. I started having to tell myself, I've been annoyed, I've been frustrated, I've been agitated, and guess what? I heal through it. I work through it. So I now realize I trust that other people can work through that too. So
Yeah, that's so true.
when I experience that pushback, my mindset now is it's not for me to change. I can't wait to see you heal
Yeah.
because you are so dysregulated from this do not disturb. One day you're not going to say anything about it because you are finally going to come to a place of acceptance of it. And I
Yeah.
can't wait for you to get there. So I'm going to sit there and watch you be agitated and annoyed because I have faith. I have confidence that you can overcome this.
Yeah.
And that honestly has helped me become even more brave in setting my boundaries because I will admit the old me wouldn't necessarily take the boundary off, but I would get a little annoyed. And I would
Mhm.
probably respond in ways that took me out of character because it's like, how dare you, right? And I
Right.
realized that that was my energy. And I said, I can't argue with people who don't want to understand me.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to leave this boundary up and I'm going to trust that as an adult, they will find the tools they need to be okay with seeing my phone on Do Not Disturb.
Yep.
Yes,
Or they won't. And either way, that is their
that's there.
side of the street, right?
Exactly.
All right, I have a
Exactly.
question for you.
Okay.
Personally, what
Mhm.
has been your most challenging boundary struggle and how did you overcome it if you have?
Ooh, this is a really good question. I actually
Mm,
talk about this in my book. I think my most difficult boundary struggle was with a dysfunctional family member. And setting boundaries with family can be hard because they're your family and you want that loving relationship with your blood. You want a safe relationship with someone you consider a family member.
mm,
And for a really long time, I allowed this person to be disrespectful toward me, to treat me in ways that I knew I didn't deserve to be treated. And I would break my boundaries consistently because I wanted a healthy relationship with my family member. It got to a place where I realized this person is not willing to change. No matter how many times I tried to have healthy conversations with them, no matter how many times I tried to speak up and assert myself, it started to get to a place, and I'll be vulnerable here and say this, where it would escalate to extreme arguments.
mm,
And I would participate in them.
mhm.
And I would allow myself to get angry and rageful because I was hurt,
Right.
and I was allowing this person to get me to a place where I would sometimes think to myself, this is not Minaa.
Mm,
And so, what is happening that I am not making peace with in this moment? And I think I struggled to make peace with the fact that this person was okay with causing me harm,
right.
despite me being their blood.
Mm,
And I think when I came to that realization, that helped me to understand and see that if I don't stand firm in my boundary moving forward, this pain that I feel now, it's going to be consistent.
yep.
It's going to continue because they have persistently showed me who they are. They have shown me that they do not want to change. They have also shown me that no matter what I say or how I try to advocate for myself, or I try to keep the peace and express myself and be assertive, they just don't care. And that was a relationship where I had to distance myself.
Mhm,
And so that was very hard for me. And I think many people can relate because some people will have that experience with the actual parent. They
mhm,
have that experience with a sibling. And I talk about sibling rivalry in my book, as well as sibling abuse. And
mm,
so when you are in a relationship with someone who is your family, right, it can be so hard to come to terms with the fact that we can't do this dance anymore. And it seems very hard for you to have respect for me, and because of that, the boundary is now going to have to be distanced.
yep.
Because if I keep exposing myself to your behavior, I walk away wounded. I walk away harmed. And you walk away with no accountability, no self
Right.
awareness, no self reflection. And so the cycle continues. And
Yep.
I'm the one with the hurt and the pain. So that was probably, till this day, the hardest boundary I've ever had to set. But I've been firm with it, and I tell you the peace that has come in my life.
Mm,
And I won't say that grief didn't come with that boundary,
of
right?
course.
Because with any kind of loss, we're going to grieve that thing. But I know that something was on the line, and it was my mental health. My sanity was on the line, and I knew I deserved better. So that was the choice that I had to make for my own mental health.
Ah, so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. You guys, the author is Minaa B, and the book is Owning Our Struggles, A Path to Healing and Finding Community in a Broken World. You can pre-order the book right now. Minaa, where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram. My handle is Minaa, Minaa_B. You can also find me on Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest with the same handle. You can also visit my website, www.minaab.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Terri.